Travis Wayne Goodsell. In Mormondom, Mormons tend to see the words of the president of the church as vital for their day. They've come to that conclusion because typically the words of a prophet are supposed to stand the test of time and be applicable generally to all generations. But in the Mormon church, when a prophet's word no longer is applicable, they just say, well, it was only applicable during the time that he was around and gave the revelation. So, is the law of consecration no longer applicable, Mormons? As an economic system. The Family Proclamation was given in 1995 by President Gordon B. Hinckley. I'm rushing to bring it up here. And this got full 15-member prophetic approval when it came out. And it was intended to counter the growing tide of homosexuality, as they declare from the beginning, solemnly proclaim that marriage between a man and a woman is ordained of God, and that the family is central to the Creator's plan for the eternal destiny of His children. Unfortunately, they snuck in some stuff that were not feasible back in that day, and they're definitely not feasible today. Let's see if we can find it, as I didn't prepare. Okay. So here we go. Husband and wife. Parents have a sacred duty. Husbands and wives. Children are entitled. Reared by father and mother. It's hidden deep down inside, isn't it? Okay. By divine design, fathers are to preside over their families in love and righteousness. What? What do you mean I can't beat my kids? And are responsible. Here we go. Fathers are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for their families. That was not feasible back in 1995. It is not feasible today. So, the necessities of life. What are the necessities of life? Food, clothing, shelter, transportation, communication, education. My list of necessities is a little bit expanded upon those who claim to be professionals in the field, as nobody thinks that communication is essential. For example, energy and fuel as another example. They lump it in with shelter, I guess. But what level of provision and protection of the families do Mormons expect in order to fulfill this? Is living in a third world country fulfilling this responsibility of fathers? where you're lucky if you can get a mud clay building to live in with your family, where you have to sell your last chicken in order to walk days to get to the LDS temple that's closest to you, to get sealed in the temple. What constitutes fulfilling a father's responsibility for providing the necessities of life and protection for their families? See, these prophets were from they're in between my grandpa and my parents' generation, as some of them are now currently in my parents' generation. But back then, things were already changing and being made impossible. For my parents, back then, my dad was the first of his family to go to college. He couldn't go to BYU because he had taken seminary, and that ruined his credits to go to BYU. And yeah, I know, he was surprised too. And so he went to the University of Utah, and then, of course, met my mom. But in his day, when you got higher education, as he went on to Berkeley, businesses were required to pay you according to your educational level. And as a result, if you don't want to pay a burger flipper what they are required to be paid, you needed to provide a job that would correspond with their educational level. And so back in those days, my dad could literally come from his graduation at Berkeley and go right into a job working for the Ford Motor Company in their emptied position in the accounting department due to some incident regarding a Pinto. And those days are gone. My dad was able to obtain brand new subdivision homes, which are the wealthiest homes that you can move into that were being built across the nation, outside of mansions of the filthy rich. And so my dad was a little bit spoiled in that regard. We had the oil crisis in the 70s that had an impact on our family, as I remember my dad wanting to go fill up for gas and seeing the long line as a little child, not fully grasping the world impact that was going on at the time, let alone understanding that as a baby my dad was going to Berkeley as they were protesting the war. But my dad's generation and my grandfather's generation after the war was a time of prosperity in the United States for many people if they could just get an education. And like I said, those days are gone. When I was going through high school, they would give me career aptitude tests. They were actually giving them way back in elementary school. But no particular career field was sticking out for me. Everything was low on the list, even janitor. And they didn't have categories for decipherer of Paleo, Hebrew, and Egyptian on there. And it became clear to me as Reagan economics took over in the 80s, as I held 2 jobs, delivering pizza and delivering claim forms for Allied Van Lines, that even though I had a lot of money to spend on cassette tapes, it wasn't enough to pay for the home that my parents were living in and providing for me. And I realized that the luxury that my dad had by having a higher education, to be able to walk onto a job and get paid what he was worth, had disappeared under Reagan. That something happened, and I didn't understand it was Reagan that caused it until later on in retrospect, with his trickle-down economic system. But my concern in high school was how to get away from my family, get away from my parents. And so I immediately took off to Rick's. That's where I went, that's where I wanted to go, and the parents were perfectly fine with that. And of course they paid for Rick's, because that was the school that they approved of. Even though it wasn't BYU, it was still Rick's. My mom went to BYU, Idaho, so yeah. And they justified it by saying, oh yeah, we'll pay for your college, but then they didn't want to pay for my university. As I now was starting to enter into the realm of, man, in order to get higher education, I now have to take on debt that I can't start paying off until I graduate, and I can't do a full course load and have a full-time job. It just wasn't feasible, especially at Rick's. You know, I got the jobs I got at Rick's because of my grandparents. The people knew my grandparents and go, oh, okay. The dishwasher didn't. His was a situation of, you come and do dishes, I'll pay you for doing dishes, but it's not going to be an actual steady job. He paid in cash. Yeah, lots of dishes piled up. My goodness, how did he run his restaurant? But yeah, the gas station job was a walk-on for me because of my grandfather. But I realized at Rick's, after I got back from my mission, which again my parents paid for, where I realized the amount of money that I had to pay in rent on my mission was not enough for me to survive. Because at first I assumed my parents were paying my rent, and it turns out that they didn't set it up that way. The mission accountant gave me a call when I was moved to Brooklyn and saying, hey, you haven't been paying rent since you got here. What do you mean I haven't been paying rent? Wasn't it not automatically deducted? No. Well, get it automatically deducted. What the hell? And how are you going to pay for the $2,000 or so? Take it out of what I get? And so he was going to do that, but then called my parents. My parents were then pissed. Oh, he's fooling around on his mission. The guy didn't bother to tell them that it was not being automatically taken out. So my parents thought I was fooling around with my money. And they had to fork out an extra $2,000 after they had just built a swimming pool and jacuzzi while I was gone. So yeah, they were not happy because of the extra burden financially on them. But I saw the economic danger signs all over the place that were coming fast upon me when I were to finally be severed from the financial support of my parents. That my RICS education was not going to give me that automatic boost in a career field, and I had no idea how to survive, let alone provide for the necessities of life and protection for a family. It was taken from me by my own government, by the economic system of our country. And nonetheless, I just blindly went forward, hoping things would work out. And sure enough, things did work out, except for the punishments by my parents, by the church leaders, bishops, stake presidents, and the local Mormons of the Utah economy when I moved here. Canada was a different story. When I married a Canadian, she took me to Canada. Free babies. It's amazing. You just go to the hospital, they hand you a baby, they pay you for the baby. The cutest little babies you ever did see. I still had to struggle to find some manner in which to obtain income, and because I'm not a Canadian citizen, it was tougher for me. You think that Canadians are all polite and kind and generous? No, they're racist, horrible bigots, just like Americans, and just like the French. As the horror stories I have about that. I had to find 3 part-time jobs just to try to make enough money, and eventually got a landscaping job that was full-time, and before I finally got into the University of Lethbridge, where I was able to get, again, the student loans, which I didn't realize that Clinton had made it so that I could have gotten, well, I don't know if it was Clinton, or maybe it was after in retrospect, giving the free bachelor's degree money for people. But yeah, I didn't get that opportunity in Canada. And so already I was extending the debt that was well beyond my means to pay it back. I still hadn't figured out a career field. I had tried numerous career fields at RICS, none of them panned out, and was trying at the University of Lethbridge, and none of them were panning out, as people were already excluding and including certain people for certain positions in education. As a guy in Canada, they didn't want men going into the education field unless I, declared myself as gay. It was a feminist field of study, and did not want men invading their career field. And then when I came to the University of Utah, I saw that same thing being done at the University of Utah. There are certain fields that men are not allowed to go into because they have purposely excluded men to only include women and those of minority groups, as I am a white male considered to be the enemy of mankind. And so that cultural shift also was turning against me in order to keep me from providing for the necessities of life and the protection of a family. And so my parents didn't get it, the church leaders don't get it, and then the family proclamation comes out. And then it was used against me to separate me from my family, my first family, and then even my second family, which was just a wife. Finally got a second wife, and that was stripped from me as well because of the family proclamation that had now been ingrained into the cultural mindset of Mormonism, that I cannot pursue being a translator of Egyptian and Paleo-Hebrew and telling Mormons that Joseph Smith is a translator and be a good Mormon taking care of his family. Everybody kept telling me that I need to find a big paying job in order to be obedient and righteous for the family proclamation. And it's now in a situation where not only can a man not single-handedly provide the necessities of life and protection for his family, but the dual household that was required in the 80s up until this family proclamation, which was why they came out in condemnation of families that were having women go into the workplace, is because women, mothers, wives, needed to go to work in order for the fulfillment of the Mormon commandment to raise and bear children in a good environment, not a third world environment. And so now, currently, that's not even good enough, where both mothers and fathers have to not only have regular jobs, but they have to be good paying jobs. And so the burden of labor in the workforce has gotten too much for too many people, as both mothers and fathers need good paying jobs for both of them in order to have a family. And I saw this in the older singles ward. There were Mormon girls who chose mission, chose career, chose education to financially be able to have the family they knew they needed to have in order to be obedient, and justified it by saying that guys are all wicked. There's no good guy out there, and so I'm waiting for the guy to come to me. And so then another cultural, religious stress gets placed upon Mormons, as everybody forgets that it's the government and the economy that is to blame for all of this. And the men who were in the older singles ward were the losers. They were the ones who couldn't provide for the necessities of life and protection for a family, and so no woman wanted them. Or they were the ones who got divorced because they weren't able to provide the necessities of life and protection for their family that they did get married by being obedient to the church, who have been telling us that we got to get married right after our missions, and girls need to get married rather than go on missions, and you can't wait to have kids, you have to have kids right away. Don't wait for a career, don't wait for education, wait for your mission, but that's it. and start having those babies. But those babies cost money. And so that conflict of economy and social norms and religious norms just are taking its toll, and Mormons are getting their butts kicked. Even those that you think are successful, no, the divorce rate in Utah among Mormons is over 50%. They don't even count those who have gotten remarried. That's how bad it is. The majority of Mormons have gotten a divorce at some point in their life and are either in a second marriage, if not 8, like certain celebrities of Mormonism. The family unit has collapsed because of the family proclamation, which has set the tone that has permeated the church prior to this family proclamation. But the family proclamation was finally into commandment form for Mormons to destroy themselves with and destroy our lives financially, economically, and we're witnessing what he warns. We warn that the disintegration of the family will bring upon individuals, communities, and nations the calamities foretold by ancient and modern prophets. And what they're basically saying is, we've set up a pattern that will cause these calamities. And so we order you to obey us so that these calamities can be fulfilled. And thus is the family proclamation.